When I left that, it left me with a feeling of like deep aloneness. And one thing that I will say that the Mormon church does really well is community. And so it's been like, on one hand, I'm really happy that I am not locked into the narratives and some of the theology of Mormon thinking. But on the other hand, I lost a sense of community that I've had to slowly build over the past 10 years.
There was a really challenging period of a feeling of loss, and then a feeling of like, how do I reconnect with these people who were and still are really important to me in the face of this seismic shift in our sense of what's true.
This experience was so life-changing that they doubled down. So it was a total of 6 months that I ended up living in the jungle with my family, with this group of families. And it was the most beautiful, still to date, it was the most beautiful expression of community that I have ever been a part of. And it was not without its troubles, but it was really beautiful expression of how people can come together. And it taught me so much.
So this is my second episode. So I'm excited. Okay. Rematch stretch. Trish Layton. Oh.
Sorry.
No. Yeah. Trish Layton. Yeah. Thanks for being here. Episode number 2. Excited for the conversation. So many interesting threads to dive into here. I'm really excited to put the microscope on and just take some juice from. Well, one thing that I'm curious about is that you've recently moved back to the place where you first grew up. I'm just curious what that's like and how things are compared with how they were when you were a kid.
Yeah, that's such a good question. So, I've done quite a bit of traveling over the past several years, and definitely have a home base in the States. And this last stint of travel, we were out for well over a year. And so coming back has been probably the deepest drop of integration work I've had to do coming back, because we've never been gone for that length of time. And it's been interesting. Who I am as a person has changed more than my environment that I'm coming back to. And so it's kind of this interesting space where I feel like I've left like a little time capsule and come back and visited, and everything feels actually mostly the same, but I have different lens or different view on what life looks like. So, and I think one thing that travel gave me over the course of this past year, especially, was understanding more about home in a way, because I think I learn a lot about my own culture when I am not in it. And so as I've returned back to the States, I think I sink in with a lot of just a new lens on what is it, like, what is the States? What does that mean to me, and how much of the States is in me? So, yeah.
So my assumption is where you are in the States is quite unique as well. You're in Utah, is that right? And you're from a Mormon background, so that has a particular flavor within the States.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, you said a few things in there super interesting, but this time has felt like a bigger shift in you than any other time away before, and you've traveled a lot over the years, as far as I'm aware. And so, I'm curious, what caused the last year to be such a big shift, and I also want to dig into what's unique about Utah and the Mormon background you have, and how all that is interplaying with you at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I can stick with the Utah thing first. So I was actually born and raised all over in the United States, but Utah has been home for the past 2 decades. So Utah's an interesting breed. I was born and raised in the Mormon faith. I no longer practice. And I would say Mormons outside of the state of Utah versus inside of the state of Utah are different. And so Yeah, definitely my time in Utah over the past couple of decades, I think, has accentuated some of these ideas about Mormonism and how I was raised. And so I guess one thing that I've noticed, like over the course of this last drop in with the Mormon religion, is how much I think I'm done processing that whole thing. And then actually what happens is when I'm away, I think that I'm done and I've worked all of that out. And then I come back to Utah and I'm like, oh, wait, it's still there. There's still a lot of things that come up for me in that space. I would say one thing that's been interesting over the past year would probably be like thinking or dropping into how the Utah faith like impacted my own sexuality. And I would say that's something that I'm still teasing out, trying to figure out how my root structure about my body and shame and the impacts of a patriarchal system on a female body. And then also I'm a parent. And so one other thing that I've noticed is when we travel, when I really appreciate that. So I'm a first generation, not Mormon, which means I know what I don't want to give to my children, but I don't know what I do, if that makes sense. Like I don't know how to raise them in a sex positive environment without a lot of work, a lot of reading, a lot of research. But my current community spaces in Utah don't reflect opportunity to grow in that way. They're either still existing Mormons and practicing, or they're first generation, not Mormons. And so they're in the same boat as me, where it's like, well, how do we process this? How do we raise our family different than what we got? And that's one really valuable space of traveling, is that I get to have the opportunity to be exposed to different cultures and different, just different ways of being. So,
yeah. Well, yeah, I'm interested to dig into a bunch of things you said there. Initially, I'm really curious, like what the process of leaving the Mormon faith was like for you, because I imagine I know people who have left religion, and like that's a huge thing that I know for many people is very difficult. It's like abandoning almost, or feeling of loss of this entire community of everyone in your life, and suddenly you're saying, I'm not a part of this anymore, and I'm leaving behind an entire network that's been my entire life, and that's just an incredibly challenging thing to do. So is the way I'm describing that resonant with your experience, or what was it like, and how did you get through that?
Yeah.
And when did that happen?
Yeah, I haven't thought about some of these things in a while. So yeah, it sounds like you have some context. I don't know if you and I have ever talked about this actually, or kind of your faith background.
Not much. Yeah, no, I've got one good friend who kind of left Christianity behind a couple of years ago, and he talked about this period of maybe 6+ months where he felt very alone and didn't really have, felt very lost, I think, and was searching for a new way of being, because his entire life had been with a certain group of people. Actually, a couple of close friends have had that experience. And I met them both as kind of born again atheists, or whatever you call it. I don't know what it's called. And there was a really challenging period of a feeling of loss, and then a feeling of like, how do I reconnect with these people who were and still are really important to me in the face of this seismic shift in our sense of what's true.
It's interesting because I struggle for the language to really embody that whole experience, because it's almost like you have to be in to understand the journey out all the way, if that makes sense. The faith journey, like kind of out of that space, is it has some language with it that I feel like sometimes I still struggle to talk to people that aren't inside of that structure to help them understand how do you get out. So let me think about this though. I mean, I can definitely relate to one thing that you're saying about, once I was born and raised into a religion that definitely says that it is the only true church. It's the only true religion. So it's almost like the idea of like a one true love. And so when I left that, it left me with a feeling of like deep aloneness. And one thing that I will say that the Mormon church does really well is community. And so it's been like, on one hand, I'm really happy that I am not locked into the narratives and some of the theology of Mormon thinking. But on the other hand, I lost a sense of community that I've had to slowly build over the past 10 years. And the Mormon church does community so well. You always have a home if you're in the Mormon church. And that goes for worldwide, because there's Mormons worldwide. And so,
So I'm curious about, were there any particular relationships there that you had to put a lot of work into navigating through that process? I imagine your family was might have been a tough one, and close friends. And also, how has your connection with that community evolved during the leaving process and since?
Yeah. So I would say that I'm fortunate in the sense that my story of leaving the Mormon faith, like, sometimes communities can and families can disown people in a way, like they're outcast. And I would say that wasn't my experience. I think my family of origin picks family over faith, if that makes sense. Like, I chose to walk a different path, but I still feel very much accepted and loved by my family of origin. And so my parents are still active Mormons, and all of my siblings have left, though. And so I think that's, so I share some sense of community with my siblings because we've all left the Mormon church. But yeah, it was like a period of it was hard, because at the time I was a single mom and really had to step into a space of like, what do I believe? And how am I going to almost like out myself, So I imagine it maybe feels a little bit like somebody who is feeling like they're not going to be accepted for their sexuality expression or something, where it's like this big, I'm like hiding this thing because I want to fit into my community, but at the same time, it's not authentic to who I am anymore. And, I have to find a space of being real. So, yeah.
Yeah. Would you be open to sharing the story of how you came out?
Yeah. So, and this is where I struggle.
And how long, what was the beginning of realizing that you wanted to do that, and that whole process? Yeah.
So I got pregnant before I got married, which is like a big no-no in the church. So I was 19 and I got pregnant, and the church's solution was like, you get married. So I got married to the man that I got pregnant by, and within 2 years we were divorced. And it's like so nuanced to tell all the details, but I'm happy to share. And then you can ask questions along the way. But in the Mormon faith tradition, they believe that if you get married in the temple, you are your posterity or your children are blessed with blessings from the covenant, is what it's called. And long story short, like, I didn't get married in the temple. I got married civilly within the Mormon church. And so in essence, my child had the blessings withheld from her because her mom and dad weren't sealed, is what it's called, sealed in the Mormon temple. So that's a little bit of a backstory. And I think at that point, when I started to understand how all of it worked in more detail, I started having questions about like, well, why would something I do, a sin, that I did, why would that have to impact the blessings of my child? Like, that doesn't seem right. Like, a just God would punish my child for something that I did. And so that was the beginning thought process of this idea of, do I believe this? And as I went further down that road, I just had to step into spaces of like, I don't think that a God, or the God that I would want to believe in, would punish a child for a parent's sin. And so at that point, I started to take steps away from the Mormon church, and I didn't have like necessarily like a coming out moment to my family. I think it was like an arch over time of like less participation. And then at some point, the church has basically records on each church member, and if you move from one location to another, typically the records will follow you. So I moved at one point, and what had happened was my father, I think, I don't know all the way, had alerted the Mormon church that I had moved into a different boundaries. And at that point, that congregation started trying to connect with me to get me to come back. And in order for that to stop, or for me to not have that challenge again and again, I had to remove my names off the records of the church, which basically meant I had to take my name back in a way. And this name in the beginning record starts at, as a child, the baby gets blessed, and then that's the beginning of your record within the church. So I hired a lawyer. Actually, I didn't hire them. This particular lawyer works pro bono for members of the church that are looking to remove their records off of the church record keeping, whatever. And so this lawyer helped me to write a letter, and kind of like a I forget the word, but just saying, like, I am choosing to have my records removed, and if you contact me, there'll be legal action. And so at that point, the paperwork got sent in, and then the church responded, ethically to the lawyer's request. And that was the end of my formal church membership. But then there's like a whole line of things after that, right? That needs to be undone. That was just the legal side. But after that, there's like the emotional aspect of that also. So,
were there any particular relational struggles there with people who had felt disappointed or strong emotions about your departure from the church?
Yeah, like I said, I feel like I was pretty lucky in the sense where specifically my family, and the majority of my community was accepting of my choice, and supportive of my choice. And so I didn't have to sacrifice any valuable relationships because of that action. But I disappointed a lot of people. Yeah.
Disappointed?
Yeah. I disappointed. Like, my parents are disappointed. Like, their preference for me is that I would be in the Mormon church. My extended family, same. Like, on my dad's side, like everybody is Mormon on my dad's side, and there's a preference in that direction for sure. And
has that been something, that disappointment, has that been something that's been able to be worked through it all over time, or is it just like there's no remedy?
Yeah, no, I think over time, like, time has healed like some things, and that it's just more of like, I just feel a preference. It's kind of like, I mean, I imagine every child feels this to a certain extent with their family, like, and that's probably, it's similar now. It's not like super profound or deep or like a huge rift that comes up a lot. It's probably just like the same maybe as you with your parents, where maybe they have a preference that you would give them a grandchild 2 years ago, or maybe they like have a preference that you would be living slightly different than how you are or something. And so, I mean, that's a good question for you. Do you feel that with your family?
Oh, for sure. Well, I haven't spoken to my father for 4 years. Okay. So there's a lot of, I think there's still a lot of preferences he might have about the way I go about. Well, I would guess that's a result of him having preferences about the way I think about the world. I think perhaps like beliefs about morality have caused him to not. Well, it's a complicated one. That's part of it. I think differences in our beliefs about the world have caused tension and conflict. And that causes, and the way we navigated it while we were still in connection was not healthy, or not as healthy as it could be. And he has a lot of trauma around, as far as I diagnose, he has trauma around abandonment. And so when conflict emerges, he pushes people away, and he's done that with many people in his life. And so the question is like, how does one navigate differences with their parents? With my dad, I didn't do it very healthily. I tried. I guess he gave up. With my mom, I think she has a longing primarily for me to live closer to home. And that's a challenging one. Yeah, I think I have feelings of sympathy for that and feelings of guilt around that. And I think the best is to talk about it openly and to try to make sure that she feels in connection with me as she would like. And then there's a balance to be had with how much I'm able and willing to give to my family versus how much energy and time I want to areas of my life. And for me, the balancing act is most difficult in my life. And the one that has the most constant charge is like, how do I give as much time to my family as they want, whilst giving myself as much time for the rest of my life? And that's a really, I haven't found a way to balance that.
Yeah. Let me know when you do, because same, right? Like it's just a question of energy and how to best place it and where do you place it to get the most return in a way, and also support the people that we love in ways that they can receive it, which is sometimes challenging, I think, with parents,
Often, yeah. I think parents, with most people I know, parents are the most difficult relationship. But there are certainly people out there who have really good relationships with their parents and their families. And I think sometimes they just have continually lived close with their family. I think that's a lot of my friends and connections are just traveling around the world or live in other countries or other parts of the country. And that creates a kind of distance our ancestors never had. And we're not, we didn't evolve to exist in that way. And so it's incredibly challenging. And we have some technology that allows us to keep connection with people far away, but it's not a replica for consistent in-person social networks that involve our families.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. You mentioned having a child when you were 19, and you mentioned when we were setting up the call that you had a pretty interesting story about your first birth, the first time you gave birth.
Oh, yeah. And
I've never heard this story, so I'm pretty curious.
So it was actually my second birth.
Okay.
So
where was the first one?
Yeah. So first birth was normal, definitely just normal in a hospital. But I was 19, and I was also at that time I was Mormon, and so I think that played into how I gave birth in a way where I just gave up all the whole control of how the birth process worked. I just gave it to a system. It was just the medical system. It's not like the Mormon system, but I had a male doctor. I had I scheduled an epidural. I scheduled a induction, so I didn't just go into labor. It was just very clinical. And everything went fine. I'm really glad everything went fine. But I think as I grew, so years later, I grew into a different version of myself. And I'm like, wait, I want my power back. I want to, I want to experience a birth where I'm in charge as opposed to a system or a patriarchy, So I did decide to do a natural birth. I practiced. I had a really supportive partner. I have a very supportive partner that encouraged me to follow that path. So did all of the things, took all of the classes and all of the breath work and the guided imagery. I mean, it's basically I tried to drop into almost brain training to greet this idea of having a natural birth, because culture has always told me it's so painful. It's the worst. You have to really try to make sure if you're going to do it. Hypnobirthing was another thing, just all of these things. Right. So that was my plan. And anyways, the day came, and I started having contractions, and I'll give you the short version. I started having contractions, call my husband. He happened to ride his bike to work that day. So he rides his bike home. And by the time he gets there, we are living on the 9th floor in a condo unit in downtown Salt Lake City. And by the time he gets there, I'm in labor, but we hadn't planned for that because it had gone so fast. I mean, I was on a work call at 11. Okay. Just to like give you some perspective. I was on a work call at like 11. I start feeling contractions and it's probably like 1. I call him and he comes home, and all of the classes that we took is like, oh, it takes a long time. It takes a while. So when he came home and he's like, wait, he's timing the contractions. He calls the midwife because we were going to be doing natural birth at a birth center. So we were going to travel like about 15 minutes away to this birth center. And he times the contractions and he's like, oh, they are 2.5 minutes apart. And the midwife says, get her in the car. So he comes back to me and says, you need to get in the car. And I'm like, don't touch me. Like, don't touch me. So he calls midwife back. Midwife says, you need to get her in the car. And so he comes back to me and says, you can either get in the car or I'm going to pick you up and put you in the car. So I submit and I, make the long journey down the elevator into the parking garage, having contractions all the way. Like the door opens on the elevator and people walk in and I'm in labor.
Oh, wow.
So, so I get into the car and at the time we had like this little Honda Civic. So it's just this 4-door sedan. And I instinctually get in on all 4s and in the back seat. And we get out of the parking garage and turn right out into the main road. And as I'm in the back, like I'm starting to feel a lot of pressure. And I'm saying, my words that are coming out is I can feel the baby. Like we need to go to the, so I'm trying to communicate like, I'm having the baby and my partner's saying, yeah, I know, like we're going to the birth center. But what I was really trying to communicate is like, I can feel the baby. So we're in the car less than like, probably 5 minutes and I feel a contraction and somehow I took all of these classes. I prepared a playlist to listen to. Like I did all the things, but not one of these sources taught me how to catch my baby on all 4s in the back of a moving vehicle, but somehow I did it. So as I'm saying, the baby's coming, caught. Yeah. So my husband was still driving and I have the baby and I pull her to my chest and I sit down now and I'm behind him. He's driving and I'm in the rear seat and he looks in the rearview mirror and he sees me holding her. And then he pulls over. And, at that point it was, I think we were both in shock and just like, but also it was just like this wild moment. So he pulls over, he calls the midwife. And the midwife basically said, like, you can go to the hospital, but if you go to the hospital, they will treat it as if it's an emergency. Like, how is the baby? And we, I'm just connecting with this little human. And we decided that we didn't want to know if it was going to be a boy or a girl. So I'm holding this human for a period of a couple minutes without gender. And that was such a beautiful moment to just be connected to a human and not know if it's a boy or a girl. But she was fine. Like she was looking around, her coloring was great. She was sucking her little fingers. And like, it was obvious to me that this was not an emergency. So the midwife encouraged us to keep driving to the birth center. And so we got on the freeway and like, I'm holding this little baby in the back and we get to the birth center and I was wearing a skirt and I hadn't delivered the placenta. So the umbilical cord was still attached. And this might be TMI, but it's one of my favorite parts of the story because it's a birth center. It's not like they have a wheelchair where it's like, it's hippie, it's kind of like this crunchy place. So I get to the birth center and I have to walk, like with the baby, like,
wow. What's your state? What's your like emotional state?
I am like, it's bliss, like total bliss. Like I am understanding this was not an emergency. Like my body is so amazing that it can do this thing. And I have to say, out of all of my life experiences, I have never in my life had a more present experience. And I think what happened is that the feelings were so intense that there was no room for any other narrative. And so when I was in a contraction, I was simply just there with no story of pain or no story of when is this going to end. I was just there. And when it was gone, I was equally just there and present because everything was so vivid. And so because I was just awake. I was just awake. So,
wow.
Yeah.
And then there was, you said bliss. How many times have you given birth now?
3.
3 times. Was there like, is there a blissful state? I know very little about giving birth. I have not done it, and I've not induced anyone else to do it yet. So, like, is it always bliss? Was it 3 times blissful for you after the deed was done?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I actually love talking to people who have like no point of reference to it. So I think it's sweet that you're asking. Yeah, so I think I mean, I think it's different for every woman, but my first one, I was so overwhelmed. I was so young and so scared. And it was like the birth itself was not challenging, but it was a hard emotional drop into, because I was in the Mormon religion, there was a period of time where I thought that I might place my daughter for adoption. So for the first 8 months, I was thinking I was placing her. And then the last month, things shifted and I was like, I'm getting married now. So it was just a very emotional drop into that space. And then the second was the car birth. And then the third, my son came early. So he was born at 33 weeks. So it had like more of an emergency type feeling to it, you know? So I would say my second birth by far, most people are like, oh, that must've been so hard. And like, that must've been so terrible. And I'm like, no, that was my
best. The zone. It all went very quickly. And then everything was great. And you did it completely. You had like this great sense of autonomy, which you hadn't had the previous time.
Never. Like I have never in my whole life, not before then and not after, had such a deep and profound respect for what my body is capable of. And when I think about like evolution, and I think about how our bodies are designed and how sometimes we get in the way of that process. And you can think of this as a man too. There's plenty of times where technology or science or can help in situations, but there's also times where we sub our power out to a system. And we actually didn't need to do that. And I think I was lucky that this particular expression of birth, like it gave me an understanding of 2 things. Like one, how amazing my body is, how amazing like a woman's body is to create. Like I didn't have any knowing there, but I was able to drop into a space of primal knowing, right? Of like how to just give birth without unassisted and unmedicated. And then I think the other thing it gave me was just this deep sense of, I mean, it was like an altered state experience, like just this deep sense of like, what could life feel like if I was fully present without story? And I've never again been in that state before. It was like a very rare glimpse. And it's something I know if I could live in that space, I would be a much better human and probably much happier too. So, but I'm glad that I got a little taste of it, you know, so I know what's possible.
Yeah, I'd like to dig more into a bunch of stuff from that. But there were also loads of other things I want to talk about as well. So when was that car birth?
Yeah, that was 7 years ago, actually. Yeah.
And there's been a period of, I don't know how long, that you've been traveling the world with your partner and your kids. And your kids have been going to like a bunch of different kinds of schools in different places. And you've been exploring sort of different, I guess, experimental sometimes ways of putting them into education, into so many different models of education. And I'm curious to know, well, one thing I'm particularly curious to hear about is like this interesting way in which you found community whilst exploring traveling with your kids for many years. Yeah, I'd love to hear like what that journey's been like and how you think about that process now.
Yeah. So we call we're part of like a worldwide community called Worldschoolers. And when I found this word, it opened up like a whole new world to me. And I think prior to that, I just had some dreams of trying to figure out, like, I've always loved to travel. That's always been a part of who I am. And I'm not sure if it's because I grew up moving so much when I was younger. But I really love seeing the world. And so when I became a parent, I was trying to figure out ways, like, how do I integrate that in? And at the time, I was like our first drop. I mean, I guess it depends on how far back I go, but that's always just been a part of the way I've parented. And so when I was a single parent for a period of time, like I would find really cheap ways for my daughter and I to just go. Like, we lived in Hawaii for a summer, but we lived in this like terrible little studio apartment and had this crappy car. But it allowed us the opportunity to travel and see the world. And so as I stepped into having like a little bit more freedom on how to choose how to set up life with remote work and a partner that could also do remote work, it opened up like different possibilities. And so my first drop actually was at the very beginning of the pandemic. It was like,
what does drop mean in this context? Sorry.
Yeah. So drop as far as like traveling as a family into different communities and like world schooling, really. So my first drop of that was I went to a community called Pachamama in Costa Rica, and I just ended up taking my kids. My partner stayed behind, and that was like my first really experience traveling alone with them. And it was also one of my first experiences understanding the landscape of, okay, great, I'm in a different location in the world, but I'm alone. Like my kids and I are alone. And especially for kids and adults, like that social component is so important when not only from a structural level, when you're trying to navigate a new place and you need resource, right? Like where is the doctor? Where do I go get groceries? How does the SIM card work for my phone? Like having a community is so important, I think, for drop-ins into new spaces. But then just from an emotional standpoint, like it can feel really alone, like, and really challenging when there's new experiences that come up. And to do that without community, I think is really hard. So I didn't understand any of that. So my first experience was just this drop into a community that was permanently existing. But what I noticed is that the traveling community and the permanent community didn't really interact at this place that I went. Which makes sense because there's transient people. And I think you've probably experienced this too, right? Like when you go to certain places, like Bali, I would say is a good example of this, because you have people that actually are expats that actually live there. And then there's people like you and I, where it's like, yeah, we're visiting. And you could see, I mean, I don't know if you had this experience, but I could see, you know, certain people's interest level in creating relationship with me ebb and flow depending on like, wait, how long are you here for?
So for sure. Yeah. People, I mean, as someone who's lived abroad a lot, like it is a painful loss of friendship that happens again and again when you live somewhere and people are transitory. Yeah, it's true. I find that when I frame it as like I'm uncertain about how long I'll be here, there's some sort of like intermediate level of investment, which because I am searching for a new homeland. And so you went to Costa Rica and you were kind of a temporary person amongst permanent people, and that led to some sense of a little bit of isolation even whilst you were with a community.
Yeah. So it definitely, like, I guess it just informed me, really is the biggest thing that I took away from that trip, is that it just informed me of like what creates high value for me when I'm traveling, especially when I'm traveling with kids. And so the next expression of that happened like more mid-pandemic. There was a group. And then after that, also, I found the word Worldschooling, which opened up like, I mean, the way I would correlate it to maybe your language would be like, it's like you finding the word digital nomad, where you're like, oh, there's a whole population of people that work remotely.
Why is my language digital nomad? I don't think that doesn't. Yeah.
Well, I don't necessarily mean like you're a digital nomad, but I'm just saying that like that phrase opens you up to understanding like there are people that work and travel. And for me, I didn't know that there was a word that held there are people that travel with children. Like, and
when you know that word, you can also just find more information about it.
You can source.
Just like type it in the old internet, and boom, there's a whole bunch of reasons. And so the word to search is Worldschooling or Worldschoolers.
Yeah, Worldschoolers or Worldschooling. Yeah, and
is there a central like organization or place where people I know you've been part of groups that coordinate somewhat. Is there a place where people should go if they've got kids and they want to connect? There is not.
It's a mess. It is such a mess, which is a good opportunity for anybody who's listening. If they want to, like, if they know how to create infrastructure around an emerging field, like I would say this world schooling community is just at this tipping point, and you can see companies now coming in and capitalizing. But for that base seed level of individuals, there's not one arching entity that holds it. I would say the closest thing that we have as world schoolers is groups on Facebook, but everybody knows how, like,
what would you type into Facebook to find a group on world schoolers in a particular place?
Yeah, so exactly that. Like, if I'm going to Bali and I want to connect with other families that are traveling, then I would do Bali World Schoolers and just see what would come up. And then once I would find that particular group, then you source within that group using search. You put the word community in, put the word, like whatever your education or, but it's really,
so what was your first, it's clunky. Yeah. There's no infrastructure that's really helping centralize this and make it easy for people. But you did find a way from that situation in Costa Rica where you were kind of amongst people living a slightly different lifestyle to one where you were more connected with other families.
Yeah.
And how did you do that? And what was that like?
I'm like really resourceful and I don't give up is how that first one happened, or the next one that I did is that I just found some key people that I know that had created things in the past in the world schooling space. And so world schoolers are set up in a couple different ways. So there's world school hubs, which would be Bali is like an example of this. There's nothing formal, but there's other world schools that travel to that area, right? So there's something like that. Then there's also brick and mortar permanent places. So I've also been to Dominican Republic where there's something called the Hive, which is it's an agile learning center for transient families, but it's a brick and mortar that it's in existence always. So families can come in and out of the structure. And then the third type of world schooling would be like what's called a pop-up. And so it would be, and I think this happens in other communities also of traveling single people, where it's just everybody gathers around a certain maybe intention or a certain location or a certain time frame, and they come together for a set period of time, and then everybody goes away. And so my next experience in the world schooling space was exactly that. It was a pop-up community where a retreat center in outside, it was really in the jungle of Mexico outside of Cancun, was rented out and sublet out to 17 families. And so people were having this different experience of the pandemic. We closed off the community with these 17 families, which made us very safe. And, from COVID coming into the community, but and then we lived there, and originally it was supposed to be originally it was like the pop-up was supposed to exist for 2.5 months, and we were only going to go for 6 weeks. But then after connecting with families, we extended to the 2.5 months. And then at the end of the 2.5 months, a handful of the existing families this experience was so life-changing that they doubled down. So it was a total of 6 months that I ended up living in the jungle with my family, with this group of families. And it was the most beautiful, still to date, it was the most beautiful expression of community that I have ever been a part of. And it was not without its troubles, but it was really beautiful expression of how people can come together. And it taught me so much about how energy exchanges within community settings. So I can tell you one story that I like to share about that space, is that when I first arrived there was a family there that the woman was like really kind of shut down, and she wouldn't be a part of the group. And so I had judgment on her. I had judgment of like, why do you come to community if you're like not going to participate? And in a normal scenario, like in my life back in the States, if I don't like you, I'm just not going to see you again. Like I can just remove you from my my space. But when you're living in the deep jungle, like you're having breakfast, lunch, and dinner with these people. So if you have a problem, like guess what? You're going to keep having exposure to that problem. And what I found happens is that the more I got to know this woman and understand her story, and understand that actually she was choosing to be in community because she wanted to heal some spaces of her past. And this was her effort to do so. Like, you just can't help but to love a person after you widen your view, and when you have to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner with them, there's no out. And you just learn, to really understand people's stories. And there's so much love and so much connection that can be found there when we can drop into a space of understanding not just their action, but the whole history of what came before that action. And I didn't know that before. So
I'm living in this house now with 12 people. We've been living together for like 3 weeks. We spend all day together, and same thing. There's like people here who I would never like invest my time in if we weren't in this house together. But we are, and so we end up like noticing things about each other which kind of grate on us, and we work through it, and we learn more, and we laugh, and we cry, and we heal, and we become closer and closer. And like, so long as people are open to being open and to sharing like what's underneath the difficulties, harmony emerges, because we're all struggling in our own ways. We all have our own relational difficulties and our own emotional challenges and our own ways of showing up as a result of who we are and how we've lived our lives. And if we can when we just talk to each other about those things, empathy emerges and compassion comes. And it's doesn't take very long, actually. But when we're out in a bit more of an isolated sort of looking out for ourselves kind of lifestyle, like many of us live in big cities, I think we miss the opportunity to learn more about each other. And community, it kind of forces us to work through that stuff. And from there emerges the deepest group unity, I find. I think I like the word force, because I did feel like that in the beginning, where it's like, oh no, I don't want to do this. And then likewise on the other side, it's not just me dealing with other people, but also me noticing my impact on how, like, there was also an experience where like our kids were going to school at a Spanish immersion program that was part of it was on the property. And anyways, long story short, there was a family there, and I was convinced that the boy in this family was like negatively impacting my child, like, whatever. So I was like, went to the mom one day and was like, your kid is, in essence, I had fiery energy, and I didn't have that in check, and I wasn't self-aware. And so as a result, like, I kind of came hot into this mom, and who started crying, and I realized in that moment, like, oh yeah, I get to also I get to see very quickly my impact
And I think in my community back here in the States, like I might never see my impact, like I might not ever see it. But in a tight knit community, like if you're showing up with a vibe one day, like you're going to see that and that impact, and you can't avoid that either. So deep learning.
Yeah, you just get rapid feedback and then reflect on that and grow and change in a way that, because if we don't notice those patterns in ourselves, we just, without even knowing it, push people out of our lives. And there's no better feedback than real life than when you're forced to be with someone again and again. And there's some patterns we each have which we can recognize when there's no way other than for other people to tell us that we're affecting them in certain ways.
Yeah.
So we've got about 15 minutes left. There's like some topics which feel like I'm unsure how they relate to what we've talked about so far. I don't know if they intersect at all, but I'm curious to dig into a couple of things. One is Burning Man. And I think I'd also like to talk about 15 minutes. Let's see where we go with Burning Man. How many times have you been to Burning Man?
So I've just been 2 times to the big burn, but there's also regional burns that happen all over that I've been to a handful of times also.
Oh, cool. Okay. So maybe you can briefly summarize people what Burning Man is in case they don't know. And then like, what has Burning Man done for you in terms of like your own growth and the way you think about community and connection and designing the way we live as a species?
Yeah. And remind me, have you been to Burning Man before?
Have I been to Burning Man? Did you say?
Yeah.
Okay. I have not, sadly. I've been wanting to go for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
I've not yet made it.
Oh, I think I might have lost you. Oops. Are you back? I can see. Oh, here you are. Okay. There you are. Okay. You're back.
Okay.
So you were just saying you haven't yet been to Burning Man, but it's.
Yeah, I've not been to Burning Man at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
But hoping to soon.
Yeah, I can definitely see you there. So, I mean,
because poncho, it's designed for the night.
You would look really good in that. Just that. Nothing else, though.
Oh yeah. There's nothing.
So I would just say Burning Man is like a radical experiment, really, of bringing art and culture and community into alignment in new and creative ways. So Burning Man gives people, I think, the opportunity to step into some drops of creativity around art expression and also community like construct. So there's different, so like in America, there's like a certain set of implied and real rules about how we interact with people and how we create relationship, how we utilize money, how we express all of those things. And Burning Man just gives everybody an opportunity to play in a completely different construct. So there's principles, just like there's like guiding principles that help people to drop into different ways of operating. So like a few of them that I really appreciate, there's like leave no trace, which is basically like you make sure that whatever you pack in, you bring out, and you're self-sufficient. There's another principle that's radical inclusion. So it's basically really supporting that you could go completely alone. Like hopefully you would, make sure that you prepared and that you were self-sufficient. But if you weren't, or if you just went completely by yourself, you should in theory be able to go to any camp, any human there, and just be like, what are you doing? How are you? Like, can you want to hang out, and you're welcome. You are, like, one of the phrases that go with Burning Man is welcome home. Welcome home. Like you are home and you are welcome to you're accepted.
Yeah. It makes me think about how when I live in places where strangers make eye contact with me, I feel so much much happier immediately. And when I can have micro interactions with shopkeepers and things, there's like some places just have a natural sort of like more openness to interacting with strangers. And Burning Man takes it to this next level,
Totally.
I guess. Makes me curious about like, how people hold their boundaries when they don't want interactions. But yeah, so maybe curious about that. And then my follow-up question is like, what has changed in the way you go about life as a result of your time spent at burns and regional burns?
Yeah. So I would say, to answer your first question, so Burning Man has a lot of feral energy and a lot of like freedom to create. But with that comes a lot of definitely making sure that there's consent. It is very high consent culture. And so everybody's kind of looking out for each other, and then boundaries are like really well accepted. Like like I am welcome also to take care of myself. And if that looks like me taking a step back or me not responding to your request, like there's high level of consent, and that's taught in a lot of the workshops. It's taught in a lot. It's just part of the culture. And so,
yeah, so just to be clear, if people don't know what Burning Man is, the main burn is like 70,000 people converging on the desert, creating a temporary city for about a week, in which there are all these enormous works of art. There are all kinds of workshops going on all the time. There's all kinds of explorations in sort of different ways of connecting and being. And
yeah, definitely. So, you can find whatever you're looking for. I think some people have this idea that like, oh, Burning Man is like this. It's like this seedy, like drugs and sex, and that's for sure there. And also there is TED Talks there. There are the Zendo Project there, which is like an amazing organization. There's a full symphony. There's world-renowned speakers and DJs, and there's a marathon or a half marathon.
A marathon?
Yeah. No. Yeah. So so just like there's a post office, a working post office, there's a hospital, there's, you can find whatever you're looking for there. Like, and if you want to just go and do deep explorations and what like sexuality and drugs or whatever altered state, like that's an option for you. But I will say, like, the first time that I went to Burning Man, the thing that I took away that I still hold with me was actually quite the opposite. Like my creativity came online, where I feel like in this world, there's a word and like a concrete understanding for everything, right? Like you're sitting in a room, there's a rug underneath you, there's a cabinet, like a fireplace, so there's like some sort of there's a construct, right, to understand the world through. But at Burning Man, it's so radical because your environment changes so deeply, and the art expression that's coming, there are no words for yet. And so you're forced to turn that part of your mind of curiosity about your environment back on. And for me, it was very childlike, so I dropped into a space where I'm like, you go out into deep playa and you're looking at something off in the distance and there is no word. You have no point of context for this experience or this piece of art or this sensory information. And so that was probably the most beautiful thing that came from the first burn, was just this opportunity to look at life like my children, where it's like, you see a kid go to a park and, an adult goes to the park and they just sit on a swing, or whatever. But you take a kid to a park and they're hanging upside down, they're pushing on things. How does this work? Yeah. What happens if I do this, or if I touch this in this way? And so it brought in like a lot of curiosity, and that curiosity I can look at you and there's a fireplace behind you, or I could be curious about that, and so it just slightly changed perspective a little bit, which I really appreciated. And then my second burn, I think, gave me the opportunity to explore parts of my sexuality and parts of my self-expression that I haven't been able to explore before in a place of play and safety.
Would you be open to talking more about those?
Yeah. You could ask questions.
what held you back from exploring your sexuality? Well, was there like a desire to explore your sexuality in the ways you did at Burning Man before that? Was there a sense that you weren't able to? What opened up at Burning Man? What did you explore, and what did that change for you?
Yeah. So, I guess, I mean, this kind of weaves into like a deeper conversation and a part of our conversation earlier. I think growing up in the Mormon faith tradition, like I definitely got some narratives around sexuality and around shame and around what's normal and what's not normal. And I think it was helpful for me to be able to step into a space where there was like-minded individuals that could hold spaces for exploration with safety and with consent and to not feel, for me, not to feel like shame or feel like a freak and not that I feel like that was like a real gift, and it wasn't being reflected in my communities when I was younger, for sure. And then even as I've grown, like I've struggled to find connection with communities that I feel those things in. So yeah, so there was bits of that, and then yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
yeah, for me, they're things I've sought out as well, and I'm curious if you've entered the kink world at all, or like delved into tantra and sort of tantric events. For me, those two things have given me access to people, I guess, who've become friends who are really open to exploring what it means to be sexual in different ways, with just like so not a feeling of judgment, and just a real openness and curiosity to each person's needs and desires. And for me, that's been a really great part of my understanding myself better and working out what it is that nourishes me and what kinds of connections I want. I'm curious if you've explored, if exploring at Burning Man has led to new kinds of connections, has changed your existing connections. What's it done for you to begin to explore that stuff?
I mean, I think, and it's like the simplest answer of that is that it just, again, like it held some spaces of play for me there. And so it took a concept or an idea that was somewhat scary or overwhelming to me and just funneled in some play, and I think I needed a little levity to just feel safe. And yeah, that felt really good. And then my partner was there. And so I think that felt really nice to share some of these experiences with him, not just with sexuality, but also just with exploration of different expressions of not only our relationship, but how we connect in with our communities there. And so we went with a camp of like 50 people, and we got to deepen our connections with them. And yeah.
I'm noticing we're approaching the end of our time container.
Yeah.
I guess I have a question around, maybe it's a more general question. Like, if you were to be talking to your 18-year-old self or whatever, your younger self, and you were given advice on how to build a life absent of loneliness and to find the kinds of connection that nourishes you and also brings a sense of deep connection with people, what advice would you give? Or for people out there who are finding it difficult to find the kind of connection they want, who are feeling isolated, what would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I think I'd say something along the lines of somewhere like go first, so like if you're feeling lonely, or if you're feeling like you want more connection, like go first, like try to create that, in your life. And I think one like really valuable mindset to have when thinking about that is, and I think this came from a conversation that our mutual friend Johnson and I shared once, where we were talking about like that desire to connect on a deeper level outside of like the weather, right? And I think I'm pretty sure it was Johnson said something along the lines of like, nobody actually wants to talk about the weather. Nobody wants to do that. Like, we all want connection. So approaching people with the belief that this person doesn't want to talk about the weather, it's just about them feeling safe to talk about something with more depth and create connection. And sometimes it's okay for me to go first in that way, as far as like disclosure or being vulnerable or something. And so I think if I could tell my 18-year-old self something, it would be along those lines. Like, just know that everybody is looking for the same thing I am, and I can go first. So
yeah, there's a going first in terms of like leaning into a bit more openness and revealing. I think there's like this sort of more macro going first of like, don't wait around for things to happen. You can create the event. You can go on the adventure, and you don't have to wait for other people to invite you, because maybe like if you wait around, you'll be waiting for a long time.
Yeah.
I think this is all. I think though this is, I want to recognize that this is challenging for a lot of people, and some people suffer from feel a lot of like social anxiety and a lot of fear. Is that something that's changed in you? Do you think was that scarier for you when you were younger to go first? And what's changed there, if anything?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I just have had a lot of practice because I grew up being the new kid a lot, like I moved coast to coast like 5 times, or something. And so I did have a lot of practice, which I think has helped me. The other thing too is that like I find myself even now, like I'm okay. My preference is for like a one size fits all, meaning I don't actually have that many friends that fit all of these needs. And so I have to create these different pockets of community, right? Like you and we have like a really special relationship that I think is centered around a lot of like a growth mindset. It's centered around like some exploration. It's centered around, like me as an individual, where I'm likely not going to be talking to you about like my kids reading, or like how you navigate travel integration when your kids get back into the States or something, so I have these different pockets. And I think that's another thing that's helpful too is, sometimes community can be there. It's like a Venn diagram, like there might just be overlap of different communities that creates your whole. And sometimes reducing that pressure to like find the one person or the one community that has all of the things that you need. I mean, I haven't found that. And so I think it's just been piecing together these different parts. And I'm really grateful for our friendship and our relationship, because the way your mind works is not something that I find sometimes within my mom communities, right? Or within some of these other spaces. So it's a bringing together of all those things. And that really feels nourishing for me. Yeah,
great. Yeah. And I really appreciate our connection, and you're incredibly, I think you're incredibly gifted at like pointing empathetic observations and curiosities. I find that very valuable in our friendship. Looking forward to spending more time in person. I think that what you just shared there at the end about like the Venn diagram of communities, and like, it's okay if one group or one person doesn't meet all your needs. You can find different things in different places. And I think, when I felt most satisfied, well, it's interesting. I think I'm not like saying it's impossible to find everything in one place. I think there have been times when I've been really satisfied in community. I guess it's these concentric circles as well. There's like this thing called a Dunbar chart, where you have like your closest 150 people, but outside of that, there's like a bunch more sort of more kind of associations which aren't so close, and maybe you get some intellectual needs met by some people in certain circles, and some like emotional needs met by people in like a narrower concentric circle, if you were to map it out like that.
I like it. I'd like to see like a visual of that. I think would be really would be interesting.
Great. Thanks, Trish. Really enjoyed the conversation. Some great stories there.
Yeah, thank you.
I never know how to. It's only my second episode. First one was with Johnson. I don't know how to wrap up yet. I need like a definitive wrapping up thing.
Maybe, I don't know. Let's think. A breath. I don't know, like a word.
A word. I like a word. Oh, a word. Yeah. Let's say a word that encapsulates your. We'll each say a word. What encapsulates the wisdom of everything we've shared here today.
No pressure.
No pressure. Well, I have an image, and it's you giving birth in the back of the car. Do you? Yeah. Do you have an image or a word or a metaphor or an action, a movement? Anything is welcome.
Yeah. How would I sum up our conversation? Yeah, just something about like just that growth mindset, like that's what I feel like the best. The more experiences I have, the more opportunity I have to grow. And then some things are surprising, even when they're challenging. There's some value. So yeah,
great
in that space. Yeah,
brilliant.
All right.
Thanks, Trish.
Yeah,
I'm wishing you a wonderful day, and let's hit the end record.
Okay.